Kyiv, a very long way from at rest. A European capital city that Vladimir Putin thinks should still be in Russia, and the bombs are falling harder and faster than ever before. It begins like this, the sirens warning people to take cover. The tracer fire. Some of the incoming is intercepted, but there's so many. Eventually, the inevitable. The unmistakable buzzing sound of an Iranian-made Shahed drone. Closer and closer. Russia launched a record 550 last night. 72 made it through. After well over 1,200 days of war, some residents are so weary, hiding has become futile. Luckily for this group, it misses their apartment by a fraction. That was freaking horrible, he says, as the explosion rips past his window. Even in the bowels of a building, deep underground, a direct hit is terrifying. Emergency services scramble to do what they can, until eventually the drones and air defenses give way to an improbable dawn chorus. There's no time for melancholy, for daylight allows a proper inspection. Relief that they'd survived another night of Russian bombardment, but sadness. Russia is buoyed. How much longer can this go on?
I woke up to the sound of explosions. First the Shahed drone started buzzing and then the explosions began. Then people started screaming outside. The explosions from the Shahed drones kept coming.
We were all in the shelter because it was so loud. Staying at home would have been suicidal. We went down 10 minutes before, and then there was a loud explosion, and the lights went out in the shelter. People were panicking.
Ukraine's ability to defend itself still relies heavily on US weapons, which President Trump announced this week were now in such short supply that America needed to concentrate on restocking its own supplies. Shorthand, Ukraine simply isn't a priority for him. And it'll be a while before domestic Ukrainian production and European allies can, if ever, fill the breach. Trump is planning to speak with President Zelenskyy today, having also spoken to President Putin on the phone earlier, but making zero progress.
Yeah, I'm very disappointed with the conversation I had today with President Putin, because I don't think he's there. I don't think he's there. And I'm very disappointed. Well, it's not, I'm just saying, I don't think he's looking to stop, and that's too bad.
Quite the understatement for the man who'd boasted while campaigning to be president that he'd somehow end the carnage in Ukraine within a day.
You're gambling with World War III.
While Zelenskyy's been careful not to embarrass Trump after their fateful White House meeting earlier this year, a senior Ukrainian official posted on social media this morning that the US president was being humiliated by his Russian counterpart. President Putin plays by his own rules, and Russian TV provides a very different view of his decision to invade. These news anchors repeatedly referring to the, quote, root causes of the war, which Vladimir Putin says are non-negotiable. As far as Putin's concerned, Ukraine can never be part of NATO or expand its military. Sergiev Posad, near Moscow, a Ukrainian drone retaliation. A symbolically important town that's at the heart of the Russian Orthodox Church. The attack cut power lines. There was also at least one civilian injury. Ukraine is fighting back, but make no mistake, Russia's formidable war machine is far from cowed. And with Trump prevaricating about how much he's willing to support Ukraine with crucial air defenses, let alone attack weapons, Putin appears in no mood to back down.
We're going to dig into some of the issues we've covered in that report now with retired General Sir Richard Barrons. Thank you for joining us to discuss these issues. Former commander of Joint Forces Command. You may have heard this morning the Kremlin spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, has said there is currently not a diplomatic solution. Is there a military one at the moment?
Well, I think the important point to start with is Russia believes it's winning, and it may be winning slowly and at enormous cost on the battlefield, but it believes it's winning, and Russia believes there is no need to deflect or reduce the objectives it's had throughout. And Russia believes if it keeps going, that the West will abandon Ukraine and Ukraine will crumble and it will win. And so until Russia doesn't think like that, there really is no prospect of them considering some sort of settlement.
So what does Ukraine need to do to persuade Russia that it must talk?
The first thing Ukraine needs is sufficient means to resist, to continue to make the cost of the Russian attack really steep. And that means weapons and ammunition and intelligence support. And that requires the US to keep playing its part. And that is looking a little questionable. And the second thing Ukraine really needs is its allies in the West to put the squeeze on Russia. And that's partly through military supply, but it's a lot through politics and it's a lot through ramping up sanctions.
The Trump administration has made it very clear its priorities lie elsewhere, China and the Middle East to some extent. But what are you hearing from your contacts in the Pentagon military leadership about their view of to what extent America should continue to be involved in European security?
So I think the consistent view from Washington, including the Pentagon, is that the US main security focus is now the Indo-Pacific and its own particular neighborhood, its southern border, for example. And in the context of the supply of weapons, the US will first of all supply itself. And the US had its single biggest engagement of its own Patriot missile system just last week in the Middle East. So it needs missiles for itself. It supplies Israel, and it has also been supplying Ukraine. So the US is consistently saying that the problem of European security and the problem of Ukraine is going to be much more a European problem than it is going to be a US problem.
There are reports this morning that the Germans are working very hard to try and find another way to supply, for example, Patriot missiles. But the broader question here is, can Europe fill the gap that America appears to be leaving?
So really two important dimensions to this gap. The first thing is that Ukraine relies on some weapons like Patriot air defense missiles that only the US make. Other countries have a stock of them, but only the US make them. And they are about $4 million a missile. So Europe can't make up a gap that only the US manufactures. And the second thing is only US defense industry has the scale right now to deliver in volume quickly that Ukraine needs. And Europe can, of course, fill that gap. It just can't do it quickly, and it doesn't make the same stuff.
Who has got the upper hand at the moment in terms of drones and drone technology?
So drones have become a really important feature of the war in Ukraine, and that's for a combination of reasons, which includes both sides being short of more conventional munitions like artillery shells, but also because Ukraine doesn't really own its own airspace. And that means that Russian drones can range, as we saw last night, far and wide across Ukraine. And the fact is, Ukraine has been terrific at innovating in drone technology, and this moves really quickly. But Russia is catching up.
There are reports overnight from the German and Dutch intelligence services that Russia is using banned chemical weapons. What impact does that have?
So we need to see the evidence. If Russia is using chemical weapons in Ukraine, it will be a significant change in the way this war is being fought, and it will have enormous consequences, I think, for how the West thinks about supporting Ukraine, because this means that almost there's nothing left that's now not being used in this war except nuclear weapons, and that means the stakes are really, really high.
If we stay on this trajectory, what do you see happening this summer?
So I think it is extremely unlikely that there is going to be any sort of peaceful negotiation or settlement to this war in Ukraine this year. It's just not in prospect, because Russia thinks it's winning, and Ukraine is in danger, it feels, of being extinguished. And it is broadly, though it is losing some territory, holding the line. So the prognosis for the rest of this year is more of the same, of Russia making some small gains, Ukraine perhaps making some small gains, both sides taking terrible casualties every day, but neither side able to make a decisive military outcome on the battlefield. So Russia is unlikely to break through and then exploit freely into Ukraine. And that would be a terrible outcome if it did occur. And it is absolutely clear Ukraine is simply not in a place where it's really able to take back territory that it's lost at any great scale. So this war will go on as it is for the foreseeable future.
General Sir Richard Barrons, thank you very much indeed for taking us through that. Much appreciated.